Well, I'm going to send the call out and we'll see what we get.
There are a couple people getting settled, the third one. Come on into assessment, everybody.
You barking there?
Well,
Your car is
She
barking?
assesses the crowd.
three sneaky pets.
Assessment.
That's right. Where else are you gonna get
Where
so
else are you gonna get this?
Party favors.
Oh, you want full folders.
So,
That's right.
was Mary gonna come and?
Yeah, should have the last one.
So Mary, Mary doesn't even come.
I think I just got a text from Alex, sure, what do you think?
I could be the person, I usually.
Is it rude to fall asleep in your sexually
I
family?
doubt it, I got their fancy stuff.
I would understand.
You're a good woman.
We will try, I am.
You said that.
Assessment of
Like, it's a long routine. It sounds like a situation, but thank you.
And honestly, when in the times this, I've always learned wherever I ended up, so it hasn't been, wasn't my first choice, but I still, so we feel an obligation to give someone.
Get it.
That's right.
All right, so you have to reteach me.
Okay. See, well, I guess we may as well.
Yeah, we can get started. Yeah.
Okay, welcome Laura Drew. I'm Nancy Moore, and this is Sevi Filati. We're both at Albany Law School in a very different teaching position. So I'll introduce myself, and then Sevi can do the same. I've been directing our externship program, which we call field placements, for at least the last 10 years, but I've been a clinical teacher for much longer than that, having done in-house clinics and skills courses and all of that. And I'm also chairing our law school's assessment committee, and we're in the process of going through the Middle States accreditation as well as preparing for ABA coming up. So this is a very timely topic for us.
And I'm Sevi Filati. I recently joined the faculty in Albany Law School about a year and a half ago. My position is actually, my expertise is more towards innovation and entrepreneurship law. My background actually is all in private practice. I worked in a big firm in New York City, Jones Day, as part of their IP department. And then I also worked at another smaller firm where my boutique again doing IP practice. So when I joined the law school, I wanted to have some kind of at least one of my courses to have some kind of clinical component, because that's what I've done in private practice a lot. So my foray into this kind of clinical world is actually a hybrid. I have a hybrid class that I teach related to entrepreneurship law and starting new technology companies, representing new technology companies.
So it's great that Sevi is now like a full-fledged clinical faculty member, which is really awesome. So I think at Albany, there's much less of a separation between clinic and typically doctrinal faculty. We have folks like Sevi wanting to be over in the other building, in the clinic building, and still fully in. Mary Lynch couldn't be here today. She helped prepare our presentation today, and she runs a hybrid clinic where she places students in various prosecutors' offices, prosecuting batterers and harassers, and works very closely with a select number of their supervisors. So it does a classroom with the students and is much more engaged in the work of the law students in the placement. So a true hybrid. So between the three of us, we cover a lot of different kinds of territory in clinics and field placements. So our goals for today are to really help facilitate a discussion of how we would assess those learning outcomes that we really care about. The Building on Best Practices books has a whole chapter on the newly essential knowledge, skills, and values in the changing world, and those are some of the ones that we like to focus on, and perhaps those are the ones that are most well-suited to being evaluated through our kinds of experiential courses. So we'll share some of our experience. You have some of our rubrics that we've been developing in our beautifully presented package. Thank you to SETI. And we want to collect some ideas from you that we can then share and make available more widely to the community.
I will, briefly talk about the roadmap for today. It's just going to be a nice, hopefully nice session. We're going to start by looking at the outcomes. There is what we call newly essential, but what sometimes is referred to hard to measure outcomes. So we're going to actually get people, or everyone, to just try to think of at least one of these kinds of hard to measure outcomes, student learning outcomes. Nancy's going to actually give us a history about how we came to arrive at these more hard to measure outcomes. And for assessing it, we're actually going to introduce it by showing you a fun little video that we prepared in the clinic in Albany, just to highlight some of the discussions the faculty are having, the clinical faculty are having, related to this kind of outcomes, and then how we think about assessing. And then we will actually break out into maybe two groups here and actually try and come up with ways to assess those hard to measure outcomes that we jot down in the first part of the session today. And then we'll just report back and have a little discussion about it. And then Nancy will talk about the takeaways from the whole session.
Okay, so just to start, take a minute and just write down some of the things that you would like to actually be able to do and measure in your law school. What are some of the outcomes that you're hoping your students, your graduates are going to achieve? Yes?
I'm hung up on the word newly essential. I
I
tend to think of
borrowed
myself
that,
as,
yeah, it's probably not really essential. We borrowed that language directly from the Building on Best Practices, which has a chapter on teaching the newly essential knowledge, skills, and values in the changing world. And it addresses such items as professional identity, integrating professionalism, learning professional responsibility, teaching leadership, pro bono is a professional value, relational skills, so those kinds of things. So what are the things that you think are really important for our graduates to have? We've identified two that we ended on that we'll get to, one having to do with access to justice and the other one having to do with cultural competence. But you may have others that you've targeted and would like to evaluate. So, and we'll spend a little bit of time today working on that. We have a nice little form for you to fill out to help prompt some of that. And again, we'll share some wisdom and ideas as we work through all of that. So that's kind of what we mean. So whether it's, I think they've always been essential, but perhaps now it's new that we're talking about these things. So take a minute just to write down what you would like to see as an outcome that may be considered, not the standard doctrinal knowledge or written communication, but something else that might be harder, considered to be harder to measure, and you can practice coming up with some strategies together. So 1 minute, and then we'll have you talk to each other for a minute, share your ideas, and then we'll put some of the learning outcomes that you want to work on board. write, what are some of the more emerging, newly essential learning outcomes that you want to focus on for discussion today? And you have something,
Thank you.
and we're going to make a list and then take it up.
We are the Hardy morning group.
It was still dark when we got here, just saying. Okay, so, yeah, the time change was a challenge. So if you have an idea of what you want to talk about, like, share it with somebody next to you and see if you figure out your ideas. Okay, so people, you have to move, you have to share. Everybody can move around. If anybody still needs some inspiration on learning outcomes, the other things that are listed are technology of the profession, business and financial literacy, etc.
I want students to see that's the one I do.
How do you measure it? Sounds like you're already So let's just shout out, what are some of the, what are the goals that you want to work on? The learning outcomes. Anybody who have want to share what your learning outcome is that you'd like to work on?
So I think one of the, once you start with yours.
Yeah, sure. So, we had a few, but some of them are kind of a crossover. Communication skills, essential communication skills. I think listening, from my perspective, being the key to building knowledge. So the active listening skills, and then I was saying to Alex, because the externship program is based within career development in our office, we work a lot on networking skills. And so, again, something that's probably difficult to measure. And Alex.
And I added two more. One was skill at reflection, the ability to think and act reflectively. And the other one was relational skills, the ability to collaborate well with others, the ability to work with clients, the ability to work effectively in situations of conflict.
So is this kind of like a collaboration too? What am I reading into?
Yeah, that's part, collaboration will be a part of that for sure.
Okay, any others we want to include?
Problem solving. Talk about it a lot, not sure how to measure it.
So cultural competency and implicit bias and professionalism. And I think what's challenging is when I'm talking to students, I'm thinking about both as you're working with a client, but also internally in any office environment, having the skill set and being able to assess it.
Okay, any others that,
Are you planning to do the one you mentioned about the awareness and knowledge of the lawyer's responsibility to contribute to the unmet legal needs?
well, that's one of the ones that we're working on, and we'll share the rubrics that
Okay, good.
we're building for that. But so this is access to justice, I'll call it. Well, that's more than enough for us to work on, and we'll, you know, since we have.
Oh, no, we have Catherine.
Oh,
I was gonna add one more. Something that gets captured, I don't know, like resilience, just able to stick through it, keep going, not get completely sidetracked by failure.
I don't know if you can read that one on the bottom, but that's resilience, which, yeah, that's definitely an important skill. So we sort of started out at Albany Law with a list that was very long and voluminous, and we discovered hard to measure. So just to kind of quickly take you through that, and then come back to your list and an example of the process that came up in a second. But we started out as developing our outcomes in connection with our strategic plan for the law school, where we identified a number of career paths that students would consider, from public interest through entrepreneurship and others. And we got together focus groups from attorneys and alumni from various communities in our area, downstate in New York City and upstate around Albany, to identify the skills and values they thought were essential for our students. And we used that to develop a whole list of outcomes. We had a number of faculty meetings in which faculty put in their input, and it ended up really getting some buy-in on the whole process of developing outcomes. And we also identified that we should have a faculty committee that's focused specifically on assessment of our outcomes. And lucky me, I'm chairing that committee, so anything that I learned today from all of you is going to be very much appreciated. But what we ended up with was a beautiful statement of sort of what we hoped our graduates would have. And things got a little complicated when, in addition to the ABA, which asks us to assess them, we received some additional information that our dean reported that it was suggested that rather than having our 10 beautifully aspirational goals for students that were pretty complex, we really should narrow it down to maybe 3 things that we can really measure. And then meanwhile, for anybody in New York State, the Court of Appeals imposed a new rule that required us to certify that our students not just assess, but certify that every graduate had achieved each of our goals. So it became quite a bit more complicated. So I'm going to skip a slide. So let me show you, these were our beautiful, so our aspirational goals. You have we decided as a faculty, so we had to demonstrate knowledge of concepts in private, public, comparative law, processes developed through change, rights and duties, etc., critical thinking, reasoning, communicate effectively, and with multicultural competence in written and spoken form across legal and non-legal settings objectively and persuasively as the context requires. We had problem-solving, leadership, teamwork, collaboration, time management. We went on to a long list of 10 things. So just as to give you an example, our aspirational goal of communicating effectively and with multicultural competence, etc., now became demonstrate ability to communicate effectively in the legal context in writing and orally, something that we can actually measure, and we have in our materials before we take you through that in a minute. And we did end up adding additional goals that address multicultural competence and access to justice that were included in our aspirational goals, but that we already had the faculty buy-in to want to do those things because we had these aspirational goals, which are still up on our website, and we would still at some point like to work toward those. So I can refer you to your, if you look in the middle of your book, we have a rubric that we use for decided as a faculty and as part of the assessment committee that since every student is required to take either a field placement or a clinic, that this might be one place that we could assess whether students are achieving our goal in written and oral communication. So we devised a rubric that we sent along with as part of our regular assessment to all of our supervising attorneys, and the plans to use it internally in our in-house clinics as well, asking our supervisors to, on a more institutional level and not for the purposes of grading or evaluating any individual student, to tell us how our students were doing. We saw some slight improvement from mid-semester to the end of the semester. We had a number of placements in which supervisors felt that they did not have sufficient opportunity to assess, but by and large, we were able to pull out some findings that at least in one semester, students were achieving some level of competence in both written and oral communication. So, but that was a relatively easy one.
So as we moved on to the more hard to measure outcomes, the ones at least that we wanted to kind of focus in on and highlight are the two most recent ones that were kind of added to our student learning outcomes. And they're up here, the demonstrate knowledge and understanding of the lawyer's professional responsibility to advance the mission of service to the underrepresented, this access to justice component. And the other one being the demonstrate an awareness and understanding of the knowledge, skills, values necessary to be effectively a good lawyer in a changing world where culture is becoming an important part of that because of the increasing multicultural component of our society. So this was obviously difficult, and I, as a new person to this whole world, I've been involved in some of the meetings in the clinic, and it's kind of interesting. People come with completely different perspectives. Some are really interested in having lots of change, a lot of change very fast, and some people are sometimes a little bit more resistant to that, or at least want more justification. So what we did was to make a video. It's a little bit exaggerated, but it tries to a mock video of one of these discussions involving actual real faculty discussing it. So
and it actually was very similar, but in a more over-the-top version of a meeting that we did have when we were trying to design a rubric or a method for evaluating our cultural competence.
that's right. So let's have a look at this short video, and then we can discuss it, see what you think of what happened.
Well, thank you very much, everyone, for coming for this meeting, special meeting. We've been asked by the Law School's Assessment Committee to measure a couple of the law school's learning outcomes, the more tricky to measure ones, and specifically the cultural competence and the access to justice, and specifically in our experiential learning programs. As you know, we need to do this for the American Bar Association and also for middle states. On top of that, we have more stringent requirements within New York. And since our law school has a clinical requirement, what better place to assess this than to discuss it in the context of our
Absolutely.
clinical program.
Yeah.
So let's get a discussion going about this because I need to get back to the assessment committee with this.
Yes.
Well, I just don't know where we're going to begin doing anything like this. Do we need a rubric? Do we have any common assignments that we give our students now? Can we even independently assess our own students, or do we need to get some outsider to assess how they're doing? This is just going to be weird.
Actually, I think this is really exciting, and I think this is an opportunity for us to really sell the clinical program. It's really, really exciting. I knew we might have some questions, so before this meeting, I emailed my friend and our friend Andy Curcio, who's an expert on this. I think I emailed around and sent to you the article she wrote, and we have the American Association of Colleges and Universities rubric. We have the Oregon University rubric. There's so much, and I just want to remind you, remember this great book, Building on Best Practices, and that great article on newly essential skills, which we're getting for tomorrow's lawyers. And then there's this other book, I don't know that all of you are familiar with it, Learning from Practice, which basically has a lot of activities you could do navigating cultural difference, which is just amazing. And so I am really looking forward for us putting our collective heads together. We're the experts on this and developing a rubric.
Great.
You know, I agree there's great material out there. And I think that we've been using a lot of this great material in our teaching, but a rubric would have to be something specific for us. Who's going to draft it? Are we going to have to change what we do because of this assessment rubric? And I just don't get it.
Well, why don't we just use the existing grading rubric and say it covers all these other things? I think the grading rubric is so helpful for our students. I know I'm really different in education, but last semester when I started, I thought the grading rubric really helped to show the ways that students are able to grow and how they prepare for their cases. And I thought, you know, actually, a student came up to me and was really unhappy with his grading. And this rubric really helped me to talk to him and to go through the issues I had with him. So at the end of the day, he was satisfied with the grade that he got. And that's great, but that rubric was developed at a meeting like this. And I guess, Jada, one of the things at this point, it's really appropriate for you to be focusing on grading and reading along the individual student, which the grading rubric is great for. But what this is about is institutional assessment. It's about the law school assessing overall how we're doing. And so I'm really looking forward with your leadership, Savvy, that's really coming up with some great ideas.
That's right, but and I should mention one thing, Jay, is that within the context of the grading system, it may be a good grading system for the people in the clinic because there's supervision here, but it may not be a system that can be so easily translated outside where there's field placements or hybrids, and sometimes they're not even doing client-based work. So,
you know, look, whether you're talking about institutional assessment or individual student assessment, we already know that through the clinics and experiential courses and field placements, externships, a hybrid clinic, our students really are positioned to learn all of our learning outcomes. It's the whole, like, this measurement thing. Our students tell us, we know because our students tell us and our alumni tell us that our students learn the most from our courses. We go to clinical conferences and externship conferences. We know how to teach these things that are difficult. But whose idea was it to include cultural awareness and access to justice as something that we have to measure? You know, are these things even measurable? So, you know, and why, if the whole law school is supposed to be teaching these things, how come it's just the clinic that has to go through this process and all this paperwork in order to be able to assess it? I think it's an imposition on us, and I hate it.
well, what about Nancy? If you came up with something that would be able to we could use for all our experiential learning programs, something really simple, like a checklist on a computer. We could just use a very simple kind of idea.
Wait a minute, not too simple, Sally. I mean, here's the problem. Then we're just really teaching to the test. Then we're just saying, oh, we're going to do something. I'm not really going to do it. I mean, if there's any time in American legal history for us to talk about navigating cultural awareness, I think it would be in 2018. And don't fear, I have a lot of ideas. So I have a lot of ideas how we can do this really easily.
How many do you have?
Well, I'm only going to give you 7. I wrote down about 100, and then I thought, well, that wasn't enough for one meeting. So let me give you 7. Okay, so the first idea is, how about we have every student present from their own experience at the end of the semester how he or she believes they confronted or navigated cultural difference. Okay, you don't like that one, I have another. So students could reflect on observations they had in the system, any place they are, out on what they saw as cultural issues that came up in the courtroom. No, okay, have another. Wait a minute, I have another.
Do that.
Well, we could make it like mandatory for everybody, and if no, one
A lot of the premises I disagree with. We can't be everything for everyone. Some it depends on the client's selection, cases. I just.
Okay, I have an idea. I have another idea that does that. How about pre and post tests on self-awareness? Because that's part of what it is, awareness and their own culture, etc. We can have administrative staff do that. And then they can give everybody these tests before and after? No, okay. All right. How about role plays? We could put in our role plays, any of us that do role plays, and then have them reflect on the issues. Okay. Okay. Journal assignments. How about journal assignments? Why don't we put, like, everyone has one journal assignment, and then it's one that everyone is, and then they can do it once a week. Or, Joe, I know you're gonna like this one because it's client-centered. We can involve the clients in assessing as part of their satisfaction surveys at the end of the semester, right? That we know that we do, how they felt that they did on dealing with the client's culture, or in the institution, the supervisors could do that. And this way, then it wouldn't be on the faculty to do it.
These are great ideas. They're really great ideas. But when are we going to have the time to do all these additional classes or surveys or all role plays, whatever we're talking about? I mean, we're all overwhelmed right now as it is.
I agree with Jaya. I think, these are great ideas for actually teaching the things, and I think we do a lot of those kinds of suggestions that we made. But what we have to do for assessment is just something simple. We just need to get it done. We can worry about what students actually learn when we have the time, when we get through this assessment project, and do the paperwork, and do the rubric, and, get all of those, get all the filing and paper stuff.
Paperwork, is this going to be more and more paperwork? We should actually discuss some kind of technological way to address that. So, yes.
I have to go to a field class. I'm sorry. Yeah, I have to go.
We haven't yet finished the meeting. We still have a long time. What am I going to tell the committee? What's going on?
That we did.
I feel like the title of that movie is Being Mary Lynch.
Actually, Joe was the Mary Lynch part in the real meeting, so it was very interesting. So, yeah, so a lot of that was taken directly from a clinic faculty meeting, but we ended up with a plan to move forward with a rubric, and I was being like, what's this thing going to look like, person? But we were all on board at the end. So did any of this, what are your reactions just to the film? Have you had meetings like this? And did it end up in a positive note where you're able to move forward, or did everybody bail on your version of SETI?
I mean, we moved forward, but it ended up in compromise where, some of the things that I was concerned about, that I cared about to assess were in, and some of the things were out. There was a whole question of inclusion and exclusion that was one of the harder parts of the conversation. We did not, for example, include a cultural competency of any kind at any point in our assessment, our institutional assessment movement.
It was really a couple of years long process to build those kinds of concepts in some ways, by having agreed to all of these aspirational goals before we recognized that we have to actually measure them, we got buy-in on the concept of needing to include competence and understand the multicultural world. And then we were more easily able to put it on our learning outcomes that were voted on really unanimously by faculty. But it took years of kind of planning, and the changing of the rules ended up, I think, helping us in the long run. As clinic faculty, we also compromise, but generally it's easier than when you're dealing with faculty as a whole. Any other reactions?
I'm just thinking, all of these processes like this you want it to be inspirational. I like that you've kept your aspirational goals on your website, and I think that's good, because then you can remind yourself why you're doing this, because some of it feels like, oh, another requirement, just like what's expressed here. So you have to keep thinking, how can I actually use this in a positive way? You know, and if you have those, you can go back to looking at them and saying, this is what this was really
Now
about.
it's time to move on. Okay, so. So which brings us to the fun part of today, where we hopefully can learn the most from each other. So these were the list of outcomes that you were most interested in building. So we'd like you to divide into, let's see, there aren't enough people for 8 groups here, unless you want to be a group of 1, but perhaps we can break into 3 groups and kind of divide this up as communication, active listening, networking. I would say relational skills might go in with that. And cultural competence could be another one. And access to justice. Anybody, does that seem like a, okay. Communication, cultural competence, access to justice. So let's see, communication skills over here, access to justice skills over here, and the cultural competence skills on this side of the room. So, so we'd like you, if you look in your little packet of materials, we do have a form that you might find helpful. It's just a blank assessment. It asks you to identify your learning outcomes, put some performance indicators. What does this mean to you? And we have an example of our performance indicators for our goals in here someplace. The page before has ours that are really draft. Learning outcomes and performance indicators, so it helps us define what they are. And then identify some methods of how you might assess it, directly or indirectly.
I would like to point out that communication is overloaded and cultural competence is understaffed.
Okay, we have anyone who really wants to do cultural competence? And access to justice over here.
So what's our sign test?
Your assignment is to identify what you're learning, is basically to identify ways to assess.
Ways to assess your 3 things.
Yes. You'll find a little form that will give you. How would you assess the goal that you're interested in, and what resources do you think would be most useful to you? And maybe we'll
Including all 4 of those.
Including all.
Yeah.
It's on the thing.
Yeah, so you can,
I put it up
So,
for you.
so are we the
with
communication?
the communication, unless you
Is it the
decide
top
as a
3?
group that you want to work on something else. We just lump these all together, so if you want the
Communication,
communication.
networking, and relational skills.
Yes, but if you want to just talk about relational skills, that's fine.
Is that what we have?
Yes, yeah, whatever the group wants to do.
good.
So, identify what your outcome is. It is one of those things that I see. This is the
I put it on
Fill out, check off, contribute to the spreadsheet.
So we're giving everybody like 15 minutes.
How would we assess
And so let's break from where we think when we say relations. Right? So, But you understand about respect, you know, how to make empathy. I mean, it's just things, empathy, listening, teamwork.
So they're
Can't even get my pencil to work this morning.
trying to measure their awareness.
Yeah, what do you do with it? I know, teamwork, respect, empathy, teamwork. What was the other one? Listening. So, I mean, in relation, obviously, communication is part of it, yeah.
Since I've been at this conference, when somebody brings an assignment where
It's sort of the,
students were given choices, they just had to like locate some thing about providing access to justice, I mean, but it was very broad, and so, and I guess they made a little.
you know, it kind of depends on who you're thinking about, what was your thinking relation, I'm on the relation.
But it needs to be,
It's here, relationship.
so how things are going, so you know, the teacher can.
Just,
But it meant that them, you know, being able to define for themselves, you know, something about it, but then they're.
see, we can get all of it, you have to have open confidence,
But they have to be good
implicit
process.
bias.
The first level is just
Right,
awareness, that
awareness.
is a problem. Which you wouldn't necessarily do all of this. I mean, so I think getting to the level of what you will be able to do about it is beyond. I mean, some people may then get to that step, the first thing they have to realize, and again, it's in business comments, I mean, just, I guess they were talking about in the class, you know, probably lots of students don't even realize that there's no ceiling. You know, it's all like there's no, you know, just something things that, but if they had to.
How do you measure? How do you measure?
Because like you said, you have to class that, that's unless you really you don't really have the notion of what stuff.
Do you think the students who are at legal services organizations, just from the outset, you could kind of say that number of students already have, just like a de facto
Real value.
like, is that an
things about systemic approaches to services, you know, because I think a lot of people work in services don't actually think about it. I mean, they think about doing their case, they think about representing their clients, but I think you could be in a whole semester and, you know, get better at your lawyer skills. You know, learn more about poverty or learn more about whatever, but I don't know that actually is awareness and access to justice. Or, because I think it's like, you know,
For example, I do not sit down in the classroom and relationships between people in the class, giving assessments. I just don't do that.
So you have a sense that probably, the deprivation that this person would have encountered residency from program or law or disability, you know. Versus the system itself, and also maybe their data, around just awareness, and then fumigation
Well, I mean, some of these things, I think, that we're talking about right from the aspects. I think, and teach some things, you can do things on empathy in class, you can do active listening, we just go exercises that we do on active listening. I mean, I get to observe you actually with friends, so I gives me a lot of information,
After a month, you won't see it.
but even if I didn't have it, so I'm just thinking of all the different ways that we see ourselves, we observe them in class, we observe them maybe in the fields, their journals.
The interesting thing about this.
I mean, I guess I feel pretty strongly that, solutions that are not all about.
So part of our program is to supervise
Yeah.
school
So the assessment process ends up changing.
I know, that's what's.
Well, often that like.
And that's not to say that.
No, I know, that's why you have to be careful what they do with what you set out is, and I'm sure that that whole thing about court saying you don't have to do this and tear down what you're willing to say you're gonna be doing with that student. But, it's nice having shifting roles in the if you have relational, sometimes you could say this semester, I'm gonna really think about empathy. And develop some tools, and then I'm gonna focus on something else, maybe, as I come back from the conference, and there's some great listening exercises or some place that I'm gonna do. Not forgetting the other person, but, the role play is a little tricky because it's set the students that were role play. And we want them to know they're experimenting.
Placement in the relationship with the justice system, where you're also capturing those.
It's not real, so it's how whatever things is what they need to work on and things like that. But it's hard to have that as we it's just a process of the place they work, something else.
Some relationship to adjusters, and they might, they say, oh, yes, or whatever, but it's just, because certainly remembering that any office in any part of government theoretically has something to do.
Method of assessment, because Edgar's in trouble with at least one.
We had like a 10-minute little role play that is helpful. Just said, this is just essentially talk about something that's not fair where they talk about their issues they care about, issues. Is there trash about it could be anything they want, and the other person has to, so they say what I really love, baseball, and the other person tearing it down. The person can only do active listening responses, like, tell me more about that, what makes you feel that way, and it's amazing how they all say it just calms them down. I'm angry all the time, so that is really, we got a list of things the only things you can say are these things in response to somebody saying something really hostile to you. And it's amazing how confusing it is that you don't get yourself back into that. Like, well, I'm just thinking teamwork, how do you assess teamwork?
I first on the one hand, it's important to engage with on the other hand, if you're looking to be both decisive and successful,
I don't envy the age, but I wish you would come.
I do my work.
I know, but that person did not.
That person's way tied up, to leave room for that.
I know.
The easier way on that, because it's like, we need this to group, but just point from the team, back to put together the short list. But, it's sometimes difficult, but some of these things, some people want to just stick to what.
to absorb that, but then try to increase the second.
Right, talking about expertise. It's easy to place.
Team would be just really active.
Very related.
Yeah.
Some ways.
They're thinking a lot. What am I doing this here? And again, part of my, like, I think it's this last category of comments, like the channels of organizations to explain actually how that relates to the problem that's being solved.
Maybe just a writing on that.
TED Talks, there's videos, there's lots of TED
That's what the time
Right, so there's a lot of content that you can have to why it's really interesting, which I think really then you could say, I guess if you don't understand it, it's encouraging you to break down the team.
In some way, that isn't necessarily tactful.
TED Talk is videos, oh, I use it.
So do we feel like this needs
Bridging to the other
to
question you were asking, you know, so what the teachers were in place where it fits in the justice system.
I know we have
Does it, doesn't do anything to address whatever it allows for you to think about if you're in a house.
I mean,
Yeah, but there is an encouragement.
so based on, you know, what you said, feelings to
Office, they take to,
yes,
even
some
some
of
of
what
what they write, so helps in or
you know, and what their contribution is, awareness of their contribution, awareness of the other members' contributions to the team.
And how I made this, and we did this, and like, it's so funny that it really lays out how to make a TED Talk.
Understanding their own
responsibility.
I don't think we chose.
But
I think we chose us.
Yeah, that's the,
Yeah,
we're just trying to break down
a good
the
awareness.
relational different.
I just started taking the No, you came over to us. That's
I feel bad. And then the advanced understanding would be understanding one's own.
Yeah, because teamwork is a little bit different than collaboration, professional relationship collaboration.
Right, I don't know.
Amenable to our mediation classes.
Just sticking in touch with the ability to have
Final
communication,
We
you know,
have
to have a plan
It's
for
another
communication.
relationship.
And
What they,
at her
Does
leisure.
like
how are we going to
Video,
communicate?
video.
What's the best way of breaking it down? That's all. Is it email?
If one of
Text
these
you?
instead of trying to do here's something to a student that make
Teamwork plan.
4 to 5 minute video or something.
Feel absolutely should, in other kind of.
So you can see, instead of just the
I'm just wondering how
writing,
we go into.
you can see how the student is
I don't know exactly how to phrase it, but it's talk about
responding
follow
to
through
maybe something or something like that. Or seeing which responsibility.
does the team know about assurance? Just like, nothing to do with
You
that.
can use that role play or make it.
Yeah.
Where they can just say, "Can we do that?" Or,
Yeah.
you know, have their paragraph.
That's often true with students.
I mean, to some degree,
Whole
you know, when you move up
What about
steps.
exactly like that, great about resilience or something?
You know,
Or
I mean,
not tackling.
you maybe start with, and you know, how I think.
Sort of, I mean, you know, like sometimes
Level
it's
is.
realizing, addressing, proactively addressing problems that they come up.
More like.
You know, like, making sure that any team is going to have
I mean,
problems.
the first level had to be that we're gonna have our aware of it.
So,
What are we gonna do?
how are we going
So
to,
you
can we talk to each other about what our
How
problems
to
are? You know,
mediate,
yeah, that's, you know, that's,
There's
there's no teamwork, it's not a one.
quite aware of, you know.
Instead of going to the
But I agree.
you know, but I think our job is tough, because we want people to talk to them about the problems, but we don't want to encourage this person triangulating us in a way to divide the team.
Right.
What I'm hearing is
Or
process
then
ways
there's a question like,
to students about
you know, what you're saying to people.
Yeah.
and more of what you're doing or accomplishing is making them aware, making them attend to it. More
give it one more minute, one more time to devise more assessment methods.
That's one standard, figuring out what aspect of relational skills I just assessment challenge. I almost wonder if so we get up with the thing.
Something you can prompted in your site visit or your secretary. Yeah, that's what we really have to buy in as supervisors. I think that they have some idea what you're talking about. And that they support you. I mean, if you're
Six or seven things that I want to know about. Well,
yeah, unless you
Okay, maybe let's report back and we can help each other identify some additional methods of assessment or talk through some of the challenges of assessment in general. Access to justice, can we start with you? What did you conclude and what do you recommend for methods of assessment?
This one's hard.
They're all hard.
Yes.
All really hard.
Yes, we haven't assessed access to justice yet, so I need to.
We talked about doing self-assessments at the beginning and the end to see if it changed about whether someone, just about awareness. So awareness was sort of the first step. Are you aware that there's a lack of access to justice and people are going to be in different places with that? And then to see if that changed at the end through their experience.
Okay, so the pre and post test of where you
Right, because we sort of identified two, sort of the awareness and then the problem solving, right? There seem to be two aspects of that to explore. Obviously, guided journaling around to raise awareness. Also, journaling or presentation around finding an article or an info or something about a problem. And that could be local, that could be national, you could guide that. But what it, to help them create awareness in each other about the problem with access to justice. And then if you wanted to, if you had the time, what do you think the solution is? Or what are some of the solutions that the courts have come up with, that the bar has come up with?
So would this be an assessment that every student in the school would do, or every student in your field placement program or clinics would do?
I think we talked about the field placement in clinic specific. We also talked about supervisors, that would be difficult if you have very diverse types of placements. But if you put it in practice areas and sort of made them specific to it, the legal services, you would maybe, not always, but a legal services placement, that supervisor may have more awareness than, a firm, but, most firms have pro bono programs, or, there are other ways in which a firm could, be aware, certainly a judicial placement, things of that nature.
You mentioned the idea of having them interview their supervisor about the pro bono work that placement does, or something related to that.
And we talked about if you have a range of different kinds of placements, so you have some, in-house counsel and you have so on, that maybe after you've done some of the things related to just building a general sense of awareness of where the justice gaps are and so on. We also talked about whether, as in terms of course materials to use, whether there's any statewide or local, really making sure you've seen what's been done at your jurisdictions level, what people's problems are. But then that maybe there's some sort of grid that that would cut across placements where you could try to make people think about whether their particular entity, what is its relationship to the justice system? I mean, if you're in a government office, to make sure you articulate, how does this relate to overall condition of justice? And then to kind of talk to people, have people answer how they think their entity, which, you know, they may have that saying something negative about that, but at least get them to reflect that theoretically every part of every placement is supposed to fit someplace in the overall system of
And
justice.
also, this sounds very formative too, so by posing those questions to students, they're pushed to think about it, whether you're in court counsel or at legal services or a governmental agency, so it seems pretty. Any other suggestions for access to justice from anybody else who's thinking of?
I like the idea of the state specific. Most states have either an access to justice board or commission, so you can get some really relevant information for the students. I think that would be background information.
Yeah, the reports
Yep.
are really good
Yeah.
to use, because they can be local to your community too.
Because one other challenge we talked about was just how you would actually rate the assignments on this kind of scale, that you have to rate it on from deficient to developing to competent to advanced. Like, so say you have a journal entry that's having them reflect on some issue related to access to justice. The next challenge would be, like, now that you figured out what tool you're going to use, actually applying this kind of scale to the answer. Like, how would you as a practical matter distinguish between their answers and whether that was competent or advanced, which is that will just be challenging.
Right, and some of the difference that was hard for me to kind of grapple with initially is separating the institutional assessment from grading an individual student. So if I'm grading a student's paper, I may be looking for different things than does the student kind of get the concept or is demonstrating any kind of reflection. And, you know, the whole goal of the assessment is to tell me and the law school whether we're providing the information or the background or the opportunities for a student to be able to get what we need and not measuring the individual necessarily, so.
Because you kind of have to measure the individual and then aggregate them, don't you? Like,
Right.
70% of the students got this concept.
Yeah, I know, I agree, it's something that we grappled with too. So for example, for the written and oral communicate, or one of our goals on demonstrating research and analytical and writing skills, we, as a committee, evaluated a sampling of our upper class writing assignments. And we developed a rubric, again, across those levels of advanced and competent and deficient, using different performance indicators. But what we hadn't done is kind of calibrate our answers and look at a couple of papers as a group, like I guess the bar examiners do, to determine what a advanced paper might look like or what problem solving would look like in this kind of context. So we assessed our assessment and decided that there were some deficiencies and we need to look at it again in other ways. And we also decided that perhaps we should be sending back to our academic affairs committee for some curricular ideas about clarifying what we mean by problem solving and writing, or so that the students have clear instructions when they're writing their upper class papers, but that having some consistency, like what we mean by an A and a B and et cetera, like we do in grading in the clinic, we decided that that was important to do, or would be valuable to do.
Question is, kind of come up with an argument too, is how, you are required to certify that every student meets certain criteria. Have you had to do that yet? Have you had any students who have not been certifiable? And what will happen to those students if they can't be certified, even if they pass all their classes?
We haven't had to certify yet, so I think in May will be our first time for the Court of Appeals. And if the students passed all our courses, I expect that we will certify that they've met these goals, you know, through some, you know, through their examinations and professors' recommendations and et cetera, but it's really, it's just a terrible idea that we have to certify every student's awareness of cultural competence, because there's just going to be a whole range. I don't think that the rules themselves from the Court of Appeals, the idea was to make skills and values more important and to have law schools be brought on board to really be focusing on skills and values and not just the doctrinal knowledge. But I think it was ill-conceived.
Well, and it does raise the issue of,
So, yeah.
if all the children are above average, what's
Right.
average?
Yeah, no, I think that it's kind of to be determined what that actually means. And
It's probably like a minimum competency kind of thing.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know that it's saying at what level you're at.
Right.
And it doesn't necessarily tell us what we need to do to get better at teaching, so that the students get better at what we really think is important, whether they're aspirational or learning outcomes that we're assessing for everybody. But, yeah, so it needs to be seen.
I just wanted to add one more thing, a different point of view on the access to justice piece, because what we're looking at is affordability of legal services. And as graduates, do you understand the economic consequences of how you do things in a law office? And so are we equipping our graduates to understand free legal research, doing things that are going to decrease overhead so they can make themselves more affordable? Because that's a big problem with access to justice right now, is that lawyers price themselves out of the market. For the majority of Americans, there's not a problem with jobs, there's a problem with being affordable. And so that's a different way of looking at it. We place our students into private firms, and we ask them that question. What are ways that the firm could cut their overhead?
In fact, we just, the last class before spring break, our writing classes, had a joint meeting with the Westlaw and Lexis reps on efficient legal research and finally getting the reps to disclose how much those services really cost. It's passed through the clients, and it was very eye-opening for a number of students.
Let's move on to some of the other outcomes, so we have an opportunity to hear about those. I know that there was grappling with how to do communication, resilience, relational skills. What did this group come up with?
Well, we started off just kind of we had relational skills, we just sort of brainstormed some aspects of what we thought would be included in that, under that, the fun part. I mean, we've kind of stuck on the fun part, which are, sort of the learning goals, which I think are always fun to think about what could we be learning about. And we came up with respect, empathy, being non-judgmental, teamwork, listening, effective communication, flexibility, self-awareness, setting boundaries, all those kinds of things. And then we slowed it dramatically down when it got to, I think we stuck on teamwork for a while on how we would actually be able to assess that. And we talked about different ways that we would try to do it. Should we just go ahead?
It's interesting, we went to the same place as the group over here. Well, we were starting out by saying, well, when I have my students do teamwork, I make each student report what did they do, what is part of this team. And we sort of started talking about self-reporting and documenting kind of what you've done and how you've done it, which, as Nancy said, is formative. It's part of teaching, right? It's helping them learn better what teamwork means. But then, where does that get you on assessment? Like how, that was my question, how does that get you to some objective measure of how well they did? It's valuable, it helps them learn, it's great. I'm just not sure if it gets us to the finish line or.
We were talking about the different ways that teamwork comes up. In an in-house clinic, you can observe, you can observe your students in class, you can observe your students with clients, you can have them do reflections, you can observe them in the office, your own office, but if in an externship, just thinking about that they might be going into a team that is already pretty dysfunctional, you know, that if we're thinking about assessment, we have to, so one of the reasons we like all these things is the flexibility, but if we're thinking about assessment, it applies across the board, it gets very, very challenging to think about how you would, because the teams are just so different in different places, but what aspects of them. Some of the things we came up with, like having a plan for communication in your team, having an ability to problem solve when there's problems in the team, being able to report on what the team is doing accurately, you know, planning. So I don't know, just.
But finding something that all students will actually have an opportunity to do that you can look at is part of the challenge. And one of the ways that we've kind of been dealing with that is recognizing that in some placements or some situations, there is not going to be an assessment of this particular activity or event or outcome. And that's okay too, as long as we're looking at, you know, as a whole, are a significant number of our students being able to do these things. And maybe one of the things we'll take away from it is training that we need to provide to our supervisors so that they can create some of these opportunities, or to ourselves that these are things that we're going to fill in a gap in our class, and to be able to bring that to greater student awareness. So it's valuable to do that, even accepting that some of these are going to be unable to assess. Okay, cultural competence.
Yeah.
So I think
We might have 1 minute to cover some resources too.
I think one of our biggest challenges is what are we looking for? If it's a program outcome, it's different than an externship outcome, because the program outcome is how do we track this as an institution? So we thought, let's look at performance indicators that are simple, and the first one was just recognition of cultural differences. How do we know that our students are able to recognize cultural differences? And we said, you know, that one, you could probably do just some videos and a test. Did you recognize some of the things? But then if you were looking at another performance indicator of identifying inherent bias, that's a whole different kind of thing, and how you would assess that and have some tools may be very different, and that's more with the journaling, maybe a discussion thread on an online class. Kurt came up with a great idea that they have to create a video of their own to talk about implicit bias and do it in a video rather than writing it. Supervisor questions were another way. You know, as a field supervisor, was your extern exposed to different cultures in this placement? Because if the supervisor says no, then you wonder about the placement, because everybody's exposed to a lot of different cultures, whether it's clients or in the office or at the courthouse or, you know, outreach into the community. So there's lots of different ways to get some data points. Kurt, Lisa, you with that?
We thought this was an area where TED Talks, YouTube videos,
Yeah.
you know, that we can be creative in exposing students in different ways to information.
And so it was a little reminiscent of our clinic faculty meeting where we were talking about there are all these great resources for teaching these things,
Yeah.
but then how do we go about in a more systemic method to measure whether those learning outcomes have been achieved or where students are along the spectrum, and then what do we do to modify our teaching in order to get better. So that's part of the challenge, but I mean, for us, we found that just the ideas about teaching were helpful, and having this conversation was helpful in itself.
Aren't certain schools, I mean, I think that cultural competence and implicit bias, I mean, I think we've heard at this conference that some schools are actually doing orientation on it. I know we always do it in clinic. Oh, you know, it's just any clinic does it. And, but I mean, I think it would be great to do it school-wide, and that'd be one way to ensure that everybody's becoming aware. Because that's really what it is, you know, that's about a self-awareness.
And maybe pre and post test there too. So one of the things that we're doing for all of our learning outcomes is an exit survey for our students, and you have an example of it in the back of the materials. And it's just a simple, do you agree that you've achieved any of these things? And we included a category of, I'm not sure what this means, because conceivably you could have a student who graduates without understanding what it is that they have, the skills and values necessary to be competent and effective lawyer in a multicultural context. And that'll tell us something too. But maybe starting orientation, if we have the pre and then the post, that would be kind of interesting to measure it over 3 years. Okay, we're keeping from the grading. And one other thing we do have is our simple rubric we're sending to supervising attorneys and using in-house to measure the cultural competence. And here, as you can see,
it's in here.
It's in there too.
Okay.
And it's very simple, and it doesn't address all of those great learning ideas that have come out of this group.
There's also a couple of other universities that have touched on that, but because we're running out of time, it's at the end of this. I think they're going to use this on, they're going to post it on somewhere. So the last couple of slides, which we're not going to look at University of Oregon. Professor Curcio here in Georgia has talked about this, and I used some of the material from her article just to mention how to assess the cultural Oregon University and the American College of American.
Is it in here?
It is, but if you want.
But you're not going to show us.
You're not.
Now you're teasing us.
I'll come back to it very quickly. It's basically, this is the rubric they use for Oregon. They look at the attitudes of the people. So how open are you to personal growth? The knowledge that actually came up was kind of very interesting. It came up self-awareness, and then once you're aware about yourself, then you're aware of other cultures and how you apply it, skills and advocacy. And AACU does similar things, focuses on knowledge, skills, and attitudes. This is their rubrics for assessing cultural competency. And I would, if you're interested in that. Yeah, this is the last one you can actually, if you want, talk about.
Okay, so building on best practices has a chapter on intercultural effectiveness that's really great, and also social justice across the curriculum, and pretty much anything else that you want to do. Learning from practice has a wonderful chapter on navigating cultural difference, and another one on bias in the legal profession. So it's all great ways of teaching it, and you can draw some ideas for how to assess from there. We also have, this is a link, if you go on Open Law School's website, you can link to our Center for Excellence in Law Teaching. We will post additional materials. This is assessing the skills and values we really care about, which has all the things that are in the packet, and we'll add any that you can suggest. So we're looking for additional resources. We'll post the other documents that Sevi mentioned, and hope that this is going to be a resource that will be useful for everybody. And the other one to draw your attention to, if you haven't looked on best practices in legal education, you will notice that the current article written by one of our colleagues, Pam Armstrong, is about reassessing the drive to measure learning outcomes. So it couldn't be more timely for this conversation. But there are resources, regular class rubrics, and if you want as a law teacher on this blog as well. All right, any final things since we've kept you, keeping you from break?
Thanks for doing all this.